The Story of a Soul, the Autobiography of the Little Flower. Chapter 3, Childhood Sufferings. When I was 8.5, Leonie left the abbey and I took her place. I was put in a class of girls all older than myself, and among them was one of 14 who was not very clever but able to dominate the others. Jealous at seeing me, young as I was, nearly always at the top of the class and a favourite with all the nuns, she found 1,000 ways to pay me back for my little victories. As I was naturally rather reserved and sensitive, I did not know how to defend myself. All I could do was to cry and say nothing about it. You, Mother, and Céline did not know how unhappy I was. I was not virtuous enough to rise above all this, and so my heart suffered very much. Fortunately, I could go home every evening and then I cheered up. I used to jump on Father's knee and tell him what marks I had had, and when he kissed me, all my troubles were forgotten. How happy I was when I was able to tell him I had gotten full marks for my composition. He gave me a bright little silver coin as a reward. I put it in my money box for the poor and used to add to it every Thursday. I needed this sort of encouragement so much. The little flower had to thrust its tender roots deep down into the specially prepared soil of its beloved home, because only there could it find its necessary food. Thursday was always a half holiday in school. It was not at all like the holidays you used to give me at home, which I usually spent with Father on the terrace. I did not know how to play like the other children, and I was not much fun for them. But I did do my best to join in, even though it was never any good. I could not get on without Céline, but next to her, my little cousin Marie was my favourite because she always let me choose my games. We thought about and loved the same sorts of things. It was as if God were preparing us, even then, for the day when both of us would be in Carmel. At Uncle's house, Marie and I often used to pretend we were penitent anchorites, with nothing but a poor hovel, a tiny cornfield and a garden for a few vegetables. Our life was spent in continual contemplation, or rather one of us used to pray while the other was busy with more material things. We did everything silently, in perfect harmony with each other, and we behaved as good religious should. When we went out for a walk, we kept up this game, even in the street. The two hermits would say the rosary, but on their fingers, so that they should not betray their devotions in public. But one day, Therese the recluse forgot. She had been given a cake for her lunch, and before eating it, she made a big sign of the cross. Some of the more worldly could not help smiling. Sometimes we went too far in trying to copy each other. One evening, coming home from the abbey, we tried to imitate the modesty of hermits. I said to Marie, "You lead me. I am going to shut my eyes." "I want to shut mine too," she replied. So we both did what we wanted to. As we were walking on the pavement, we did not have to worry about the traffic, but after a few minutes, thoroughly enjoying walking with closed eyes, the two scatterbrains fell over some packing cases standing at the door of a shop and knocked them over. The shopkeeper was very cross and rushed out at once to rescue his goods. The would-be blind picked themselves up and hurried off with their eyes and ears wide open to get a well-deserved scolding from Jean, who seemed just as cross as the shopkeeper. I have said nothing so far of how my relations with Céline altered. At Lisieux, our roles were completely changed. She was now the mischievous imp, and Therese the quiet little girl who cried too much. She needed someone to stand up for her, and I can't tell you how bravely her darling little sister took on the part. We often exchanged little gifts, which gave us both tremendous delight. How unsophisticated we were at this age. Our souls opened out in all their freshness like the spring flowers happy to receive the dew at dawn, our petals swaying to the same light breeze. We shared all our joys, and I felt that very strongly on the wonderful day of Celine's first communion, when I was only 7 and had not yet started at the Abbey. What lovely memories I have of her preparation. During the last few weeks, we used to talk to her every evening about the great step she was going to take. I used to listen too, eager to prepare myself, and when told to go away because I was still too young, how sad I was. Surely, I thought, 4 years was not too long to spend preparing to receive our Lord. One evening I overheard you saying to my sister, "After your first communion, you must begin an entirely new life." I made up my mind at once that I would not wait until my communion before starting this new life, but would begin when she did. During her retreat, she stayed at the Abbey, and the time passed very slowly for me, until at last the great day came. It made a wonderful impression on my heart, and seemed like the prelude to my own first communion. I received such graces that day, and look back on it as one of the loveliest of my life. I have rather interrupted my story by going back to this delightful memory. So now I must go on to speak of the time when Jesus took from me the little mother I loved so much. This separation nearly broke my heart. I remember that I said once that I should like to go with you to a far-off desert, and you said that you felt the same, but would wait until I was big enough. Little Therese had taken this impossible promise seriously, and it hurt dreadfully to hear her dear Pauline talking to Marie about entering Carmel soon. I did not know what Carmel was. I only knew she was going to enter a convent and leave me. She was not going to wait for me. How can I describe what went on in my heart? In a moment, I saw what life is really like, full of suffering and continual separations, and I burst into bitter tears. I did not know then the joy of sacrifice. I was weak, so weak that I look upon it as a great grace to have been able to bear a trial which seemed quite beyond me. I shall always remember how tenderly my little mother consoled me. She told me what life in a cloister was like, and one evening later on, when I was all alone, turning these things over in my mind and thinking about the picture she had drawn for me, I felt that Carmel was the desert in which God wished to hide me too. I felt this so intensely that there could be no doubt about it. This was no childish dream, nor the enthusiasm of the moment. It had about it the certainty of a divine call, and this indescribable feeling was accompanied by a deep peace. Next day, I told you of my desires. You believed they were from heaven, and promised you would take me soon to Carmel to tell my secret to Mother Prioress. A Sunday was chosen for this solemn visit. I was rather embarrassed to find that my cousin Marie, still young enough to see the Carmelites face to face, was to come with me. I had to think of some way of being left in the parlour alone, and this is what I decided to do. I told Marie that, as it was such a privilege to see Reverend Mother, we ought to be very good, and that the polite thing to do would be for each of us to confide in her. That would obviously mean that first one, then the other would have to go out for a while. The 2nd of October came as a day of tears and blessings as Jesus gathered the first of his flowers, the chosen one who was to become a few years later the mother of her sisters. While Father, with Uncle and Marie, climbed Mount Carmel to offer his first sacrifice, my aunt took me to Mass with Leonie and Céline. We were crying so much when we went into church that everyone looked at us in surprise, but this did not stop us. I wondered how the sun could go on shining. Dear Mother, you probably think I am exaggerating, and I quite see that saying goodbye to you should not have upset me so much. But I really was still something of a baby and had to go through many a storm before I reached the harbour of peace or tasted the fruits of total surrender and perfect love. That afternoon, I saw my dear Pauline behind the grill of Carmel, a Sister Agnes of Jesus. How I suffered on that visit. As I am writing the story of my soul, I think I should put down everything. So I must tell you that this first pain of being separated seems as nothing compared with what followed. I was used to having heart-to-heart talks with my little mother whenever I wanted. Now I could only get a few moments when the family had finished, and even that was not easy. Of course, I spent those few minutes crying and went away heartbroken. I didn't understand that it would have been impossible to give us half an hour each, and that naturally most of the time belonged by right to Father and Marie. I did not understand, and deep down in my heart I thought, I have lost Pauline. The weight of this suffering caused my mind to develop much too quickly, and it was not long before I was seriously ill. There is no doubt that the devil had a hand in this illness. He was probably so jealous over your entry into Carmel and all we were going to do against him in the time to come that he wanted to vent his fury on me. He did not know that the Queen of Heaven was keeping faithful watch over her little flower, smiling down on her from above. She was ready to calm the storm just when the frail and slender stem was in danger of being broken forever. At the end of the year 1882, I developed a continual headache, which went on until Easter 1883. It was just bearable and did not stop me going on with my studies. About that time, Father went to Paris with Marie and Leonie, leaving Céline and me in the care of my uncle and aunt. One evening, when I found myself alone with my uncle, he talked about Mother and of the past so tenderly that it touched me deeply and made me cry. He was most moved to find me so sensitive, and was so surprised to find that I could feel as I did, that he made up his mind to do all he could during the holidays to turn my mind on to other things. But God chose otherwise. That very evening, my headache developed most violently, and I was seized with a strange trembling, which went on all night. My aunt, like a true mother, did not leave me for a moment, and all through my illness she was wonderfully tender, looking after me with most devoted and delicate care. I can't describe what Father went through when he got back from Paris and found me so ill. Before long, he became convinced that I was going to die, but our Lord would have told him, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God." Yes, the end of this trial really was the glory of God. He was glorified by the wonderful resignation of my father and of my sisters, and especially of Marie. How she suffered, and what a great debt I owe to her. Her heart told me what to do, and the insight of the most skilled doctors can't compare with that of a mother's heart. All the while, mother, the day when you were to take the habit was drawing near. No one talked about it in front of me, for fear of causing fresh trouble, for they were all quite convinced I would not be able to go. But deep in my own heart, I was sure that God would console me by letting me see you again on that day, that the feast day would be cloudless. Surely Jesus would not give pain to his bride by leaving me out. My illness had caused you enough suffering already. I was not mistaken. In fact, I was able to put my arms around you, sit on your knee, hide myself underneath your veil, and receive your loving caress. I was able to gaze at you for a moment, looking so lovely in your snow-white veil. It was a wonderful day, breaking in upon my time of darkness. But that day, or rather that short hour, passed all too quickly, and soon I had to return to the carriage, which took me away from you. When I got back to Les Buissonets, they sent me to bed, though I did not feel the slightest bit tired. The next day, however, I had a bad relapse, and the illness became so serious that it did not seem humanly possible for me to recover. I do not know how to describe that strange illness. I said things I did not think, and did things as if I were forced to do them in spite of myself. I seemed to be delirious nearly all the time, but I am sure I never lost my reason for a moment. Sometimes I was in a coma for hours on end, unable to move at all. Though all through it I was able to hear distinctly what anyone near me was saying, even in a whisper, and I can remember it to this day. How the devil terrified me. I became frightened of everything. My bed seemed to be surrounded by frightful precipices. Some nails in the wall of my room petrified me because they looked to me like great black charred fingers, until sometimes I had to cry out. One day, Father was looking down at me in silence, holding his hat, when suddenly it seemed to turn into a horrible shape. I showed such terror that poor Father went out sobbing. But if God allowed the devil to attack openly, he also sent visible angels to console and strengthen me. Marie never left me nor gave any sign of being tired, in spite of all the trouble I must have been, for I could not bear to let her go away. When Victoire was looking after me at meal times, I never stopped crying and calling out, "Marie, Marie." I only kept quiet when she wanted to go to Mass or to see Pauline. Léonie and my darling Céline did so much for me too. Every Sunday they used to spend hours shut up with a child who seemed to have lost her reason. Oh, my sisters, how you suffered for me. Uncle and aunt loved me very much too. My aunt came to see me every day and brought me lots of little delicacies. I can't say how much my affection for them grew through all this. Father had often said to us, "Remember, my dears, that your uncle and aunt are remarkably devoted to you." In his old age, he himself experienced their devotion, and now he must be watching over those who lavish so much love on him and repaying all their care. Whenever the pain eased a little, I thoroughly enjoyed myself weaving crowns of daisies and forget-me-nots for the statue of Our Lady. It was the lovely month of May, and the world was full of spring flowers. Only the little flower was wilting. But there was a sun not far away to which the petals of the little flower would often turn, the statue of the Queen of Heaven. Father came into my room one morning on the verge of tears and went over to Marie. Sadly, he gave her some gold coins and told her to have a novena of masses said at the shrine of Our Lady of Victories for the recovery of his little queen. His faith and love touched me so much that I wanted to jump up and tell him I was cured. But this was not enough to work a miracle, and it needed a big one to bring me back to life, a very big one. But Our Lady of Victories obtained it. It was one Sunday during the novena. Marie went out into the garden, leaving me with Leonie, who was reading by the window. After a few minutes, I called out quietly, "Marie, Marie." Leonie was accustomed to this sort of thing and took no notice, so I called louder, and Marie came back. I saw her quite clearly come in, and then for the first time I did not recognize her. Anxiously, I looked all around me, then toward the garden again, still calling, "Marie, Marie." I went through dreadful suffering during this struggle, yet Marie probably suffered even more. She went on trying to get me to recognize her, but without success, until finally she turned and whispered something to Leonie before she disappeared, pale and trembling. At once, Leonie carried me to the window overlooking the garden, and still without recognizing her, I saw Marie walking slowly up and down, holding out her arms to me, smiling and calling, "Thérèse, my darling Thérèse." As even this failed, she came back in tears and knelt at the foot of my bed. Then turning toward Our Lady's statue, she began praying for me with all the fervour of a mother interceding for her baby's life. Leonie and Céline began to pray too. Heaven opened its gates in answer to their faith. As I could find no help on earth and was almost dying of misery, I too turned to my Heavenly Mother, asking her with all my heart to take pity on me now. Suddenly the statue came to life, and Mary appeared utterly lovely, with a divine beauty I could not possibly describe. There was a wonderful sweetness and goodness about her face, and her expression was infinitely tender. But what went right to my heart was her smile. Then all my pain was gone. Silently 2 big tears trickled down my cheeks, tears of complete and heavenly happiness. Our Lady had come to me. How happy I am, I thought, but I must not tell anyone of this happiness, or this happiness will go away. When I lowered my eyes, I recognized Marie at once. She was looking lovingly at me and appeared to be very moved, as though she half guessed what had just happened to me. I am quite sure I owed the wonderful favour of Mary's smile to her prayers. Seeing my gaze fixed on the statue, she said to herself, "Thérèse is cured," and so she was. The light from her gentle sun had revived the little flower. Delivered once and for all from her cruel enemy, she was alive again. The dark winter was over, and the rain was gone. So well did Our Lady's flower flourish that 4 years later she was blooming in the fertile soil of Mount Carmel. Marie, as I said, was sure that it was Mary who had restored me to health, and had half guessed the rest as well. When we were alone, she pressed me so delicately to tell her what it was that I could not refuse, and I was so surprised to find how much she had guessed, though I had said nothing, that I then revealed everything. I had not been mistaken. At once my happiness went, dissolved into bitterness, and for 4 years the memory of that unforgettable favour caused me nothing but pain. My happiness was restored after that, and in all its fullness at the shrine of Our Lady of Victories, as I knelt at her feet, and I will say more of that later. But first, let me tell you my joy was turned to sadness. Marie listened to me as I told my story with childish simplicity, and then asked me if she could tell them about it at Carmel, and I did not like to say no. It was such a joy to me on this visit to see you in your habit, and I think it was a wonderful moment for us both. It's so much to talk about after all our suffering. Though I could hardly say anything, I was so happy. I was treated very affectionately by Mother Marie de Gonzague, and I also saw several of the other nuns, all of whom asked me about my miraculous cure. Some wanted to know if Our Lady had been carrying the child Jesus, others if she had been accompanied by angels, and so on. All these questions worried me very much, and all I could say was, Our Lady was very lovely, and I saw her come toward me and smile. When I saw that they had such different ideas about it, I thought perhaps I had told them something wrong. If only I had kept my secret, I should have kept my happiness too. Our Lady was allowing me to go through all this for my own good. I should probably have become vain about it, if it had been otherwise. As it was, all I got was humiliation, and could only regard myself with contempt. Dear God, you alone know all that I endured.